Welcome to another video here on Diablo 4. Today I'm bringing you a quick guide on the NECRO Bone Spear build, which is pretty much regarded as a one-shot build. As you can see here in the background, we've got some footage here of a little event, some elites here, and as you can see they're just getting deleted. This is because of Bone Spear. Bone Spear is some boy. If you spec into it, put all your memes into it, and generally try and buff that ability, you can just go around doing this kind of stuff. We talked a little bit about the abilities we've got on our bar here. So we've got the summon skeleton there because we do indeed use skeletons here. The ones we're using are reapers, because they generally are good at generating corpses, which is our resource generator here. So as you can see, there's plenty of corpses around most of the time, which we can use for corpse tendrils, which is our next ability there in the bar at the bottom. That's really good at obviously pulling big groups of enemies into a nice cluster, which you can then just boom, there you go, with a nice bone spear and wipe a lot of them out pretty much. When you are running a bit low on essence, or if you're a bit overwhelmed with sort of lower tier enemies, you can just do a bit of a spam here with corpse explosion, and as you can see, it generally just deletes most of the enemies and refills your resource bar. And then once your corpse tendrils is back up again, you can just pop that up and get everybody in the middle and kill them with a bone spear. So let's move along into the abilities then that we're using, or rather sort of like the skill tree if you like. We've mentioned of course that we use Raised Skeleton to sort of regen our essence and to also keep our minions up. Corpse Tendrils to pull things into the center, and you can use then Corpse Explosion or Bone Spear here to destroy them. And then we've also got Blood Mist here, which is kind of like a defensive ability, but it also ties in with one of the legendaries we use in here. I'll show you sort of how that works. Let's have a look then at the abilities. The skill tree here, I'll also link this down in the description so you don't have to sort of like pause the video and go through every ability that I've got. But we've only really got 1 point into Bone Splinters and 1 point here to fire extra projectiles. Probably not even necessary, but either way I've gone into that. Then we've maxed out Bone Spear because that's obviously the main ability here. Obviously you get the enhanced Bone Spear, and then the paranormal Bone Spear, which has the 5% increased critical strike chance, and if Bone Spear's primary projectile critically strikes, it fires 2 additional Bone Spears upon being destroyed. That's what it's all about, the Bone Spear. And then we've got here the maximum essence, and the one which increases how much your core skills cost but also does more damage. And then this one here, the Hued Flesh, which basically gives you extra chance to generate corpses, which again is used for the corpse explosion, and that's also your essence generator, so you can do more bone spears. As I spoke about before, we've got the Blood Mist here with just 1 point in there as a bit of a immunity for 3 seconds, just in case you do get in a bit of a pickle. We've maxed out Corpse Explosion, and we've got some extra ranks in there from some gear. Then we've gone for obviously the Enhanced Corpse Explosion, and then the Blighted Corpse Explosion, which is the one that leaves behind this big pool which does a lot of damage to people who are stood inside. Then we've also got 3 points here into the Skeletal Warrior Mastery, which basically increases your damage and health of your skeletal warriors. And then Grim Harvest, which basically gives you your essence generation. Like it says here, consuming a corpse gives you 6 essence, and then you deal 9% increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming a corpse. So you can see how this is starting to work out. We're consuming corpses for essence generation and extra damage, and then of course just banging out our bone spears on enemies which are grouped in the center. Here we've got Death's Embrace. Close enemies deal more damage to you, from you, and you deal 9% less damage to you. Our Corpse Tendrils, which is fully spec'd into, and then the last one here is the Plagued Corpse Tendrils, which makes anybody vulnerable who is affected by Corpse Tendrils, which, well, does extra damage. And then we've invested all these 9 points here into Serration, Compounded Fracture and Evolution. We've basically foregone a ultimate ability and gone for ossified essence, which brings us nicely into the gear. I've got the Deathless Visage. You could do with a better one of these, to be honest with you. This one's kind of a low one, only 683 eye level, but even still, it basically buffs your Bone Spear and leaves behind a nice trail which does loads of damage. As you can see through this gear, you'll start to see what kind of gear stats I'm going for. Mainly intelligence, all stats, and sort of physical damage or damage with bone skills. Here again, you've got intelligence plus 4 ranks of Bone Spear, all stats, crit strike damage. Legs, I've gone a bit more defensive, damage reduction, some ranks of corpse explosion, maximum life and damage regen, life regen. And then boots, you've got some all stats on there, fortified generation, lightning resist and damage reduction whilst injured. That's quite big because a lot of the time you will be injured. And I've gone for the max 3 evade charges because you do need to be bouncing around quite a lot in this spec. The weapon, which is basically the centerpiece of the build if you like, gives you extra critical strike damage with two-handed swords. So a two-handed sword is the weapon you want to go for, basically because of that critical strike damage. And the kind of things we're focusing on here is the main stat intelligence. The damage to close isn't ideal. Preferably you'd want, you know, damage to ranged or damage to vulnerable. But unfortunately, this is the best sword I've got so far. Critical strike with bone skills, of course, that complements our build very nicely. And then 55.5% core skill damage, which again, extra damage on our Bone Spear. And then it's imprinted, as you can see, with the Bone Spear legendary aspect, which gives you extra damage basically to your Bone Spear and makes them vulnerable. That's about it really. You know, you want to be going for crit, bone skill damage, physical damage, anything that buffs Bone Spear, and intelligence does that, so I like to go for a lot of intelligence on my builds. When we start looking into our Book of the Dead, we've basically only got the Skeletal Warriors, which are the Reapers, because they have a 15% chance to carve flesh off an enemy, forming a corpse, which again is our essence generation stuff, which we want. We've got Skeletal Mage's Sacrifice, the Cold Ones, which give you 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Again, that's kind of part of the build, doing extra damage to vulnerable enemies, extra critical strike damage, damage to distant enemies, damage with core skills. So you want to kind of focus on them types of items. Golems Sacrifice here, the Iron Ones, which give you 30% increased critical strike damage. And if we look, into our actual stats here, critical strike damage is 239% now, and then critical strike damage with bone skills is 159%. Our critical strike chance is 31%, but that's actually increased to like 50% when I use Corpse Tendrils, which is one of the main legendaries that we're going to use here. This one, as you can see, again 20% increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds when you cast Corpse Tendrils, and you also deal 60% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils, which is why you were seeing me popping off doing crits of over 1 million just deleting things. Corpse Tendrils, Bone Spear, brilliant combo. So that's one of the main legendaries you want to run with, the Corpse Tendrils. This one's quite nice as well, but not essential, which is the one which increases your damage with core skills after consuming a corpse. So of course, if you're popping a load of corpses, your core skills are going to do more damage. This ossified essence is also a key one. You want to put it on your amulet to get like bonus from it, and this is the one which basically buffs your critical strike damage of your bone skills, as you can see here, based on how much essence you've got. And then this one here on the main weapon, the Bone Spear, which I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you can get this from a dungeon. Ideally you want to get a higher roll one from another item and then rip that off the item and imprint it onto your main weapon. But unfortunately this is just the base one from the codex, but it's the one which buffs Bone Spear and gives, you know, extra damage to vulnerable Bone Spear people. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, this is essentially the build. When we start moving into the Paragon stuff, I'll let you figure this out. It's quite interesting. It's essentially just boards with skills on them, but to give you an idea, the first one I've gone for has this legendary skill here, Bone Graft, which is buffing your bone skills. So that's the one you kind of want to go with, and try and pick up these rare nodes here, which give you a lot of extra damage, and then also the magic nodes as well, which you can see here. If we actually expand it, you can see it a bit better. But yeah, you want to sort of make a path through these Paragon boards where you're picking up skills which are buffing, like you can see here, critical strike damage with bone skills. These ones up here, extra bone skill damage. This one up here, maximum essence, bone skill damage. And then the next board I've gone with is I think like the Gravekeeper one. It's kind of buffed by corpses. I'm going to be working towards this one here, the Scent of Death, which is basically gives you damage reduction when you've got corpses around, and then extra damage when you've got no corpses. But you can figure all this kind of stuff out. I'm trying to keep this kind of short, so that's the the meat and bones of it. Go with a two-handed sword, kind of focus on stats like intelligence and stuff that increases your damage with bone skills, critical strike damage, and things like that. But try not to neglect things like, extra armor or extra health, because you don't want to be too squishy. But that's essentially the guide. As you saw earlier in the video, we sort of dealt with the Butcher within about 3 seconds. I'll leave you with a little clip here as well of just defeating an end dungeon boss, which is typical of how this kind of build goes. You'll sort of just kill bosses in 2 or 3 right clicks, and hopefully you can get this build right and enjoy it as much as I have. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.